Somewhere, below the veil of waves and sediment, beneath layers of silted forgetting, there is a silence that remembers. Not the silence of absence, not the silence of death, but the silence of interrupted memory, the kind that waits with patient breath at the ocean floor, suspended in the hush of ruin. Atlantis, a name more whispered than spoken, a continent that may never have existed and yet continues to live in imagination, more vivid than places we know. No maps hold it, no consensus claims it. But in dreams it is detailed, in silence it is loud. What does it mean that a myth can survive longer than a monument? That we remember the idea of a civilization so clearly, even if the stones were never laid? Atlantis is not a city, it is an ache. Plato said it sank, others say it never rose. But what if both are true? What if it was never meant to be found on a coastline, but along the inner shore where knowledge waits for us to become ready? Close your eyes. Imagine a civilization more ancient than memory, one that built not with bricks, but with intention, whose structures aligned not with land but with stars, who etched spirals not into stone, but into mind, a society where thought shaped matter, where language was sung, not spoken, where wisdom moved like water, fluid, reflective, ungraspable, unless you became still. Imagine their temples, not tall, but deep, stairways spiraling downward into self, their ceilings charted with constellations now lost, their floors humming with frequencies no longer audible to our modern ears. A dome made of mirrored symbols, where knowledge looked back at you. And then, one day, silence. Not destruction, not explosion, but a deliberate quieting. What if Atlantis wasn't destroyed, but hidden? Not to punish, but to protect. Imagine a civilization advanced enough to know that knowledge given too soon corrodes instead of enlightens. That wisdom forced into unready minds becomes a weapon. So they erased their trail, not in panic, but in mercy. They let the ocean swallow their steps. They turned memory into metaphor, left clues buried in story, not stone. This is why we find fragments, ruins beneath water, half-formed symbols in other cultures, stories of floods told across continents that never met. These are not proofs. They are resonances, echoes from a civilization that no longer speaks, but still listens. It is possible Atlantis never existed as a place, but entirely real as a frequency. A pattern the world occasionally remembers, like a dream that returns not with content, but with feeling. Atlantis is not the past. Atlantis is a potential, one we may arrive at again, if we remember how to listen beneath the surface noise. Ask yourself, why does this myth endure? Why do we continue to draw it, name it, dream it, when logic tells us to forget? Because the dream persists. Because there is something inside us that recognizes the shape of the lost. It is in the architecture that repeats across continents, spirals, stepped pyramids, temples aligned with solstices. It is in the myths that speak of golden ages before the fall. It is in the deep human instinct that says, we once knew something more. Atlantis is not lost, it is latent, a slumbering geometry encoded within human potential, waiting to be reawakened, not through excavation, but through reflection, through stillness. Perhaps that's why it fell, not because of arrogance or punishment, but because time demands forgetting before remembering. so that when the truth returns, it returns not as inheritance, but as revelation. You do not find Atlantis by looking. You find it by becoming still enough to feel the echo of a civilization that understood things without needing to prove them. Not every truth is meant to be dug up. Some truths must rise on their own, as memory, as intuition, as a feeling of deep knowing that arrives unannounced, like a voice you've never heard but somehow recognize. So tonight, let yourself drift into that ocean. Let the black beneath your thoughts unfold. Let the ruins breathe. And if you listen carefully, past the noise of modern noise, beneath the wreckage of forgotten timelines, you may find it, not in place, but in pattern. A whisper beneath the waves, a truth shaped like water. Atlantis, still waiting, still listening. They rise without names, no inscriptions, no kings, no wars memorialized, just the stones, just the silence, just the presence. Göbekli Tepe, a place older than myth, older than agriculture, older than the wheel. It stands not to be seen, but to be felt, as though each stone is not merely a pillar, but a page from a book carved before language. T-shaped monoliths arranged in circles, heavy beyond reason, marked with animals that watch without blinking. Foxes, birds, serpents, not decorations, but symbols, not metaphors, but messengers. And yet the site itself was buried deliberately, covered, hidden, preserved by those who built it, as if the knowledge it contained was too early, too sharp, too alive. The stones do not speak in words, they speak in presence. What happens when a civilization speaks not through scrolls, but through geometry? When they embed memory in structure, when they organize space so deliberately that it transmits meaning across millennia. Imagine walking among them, no tour guide, no plaque, only stone. And yet, a sense of being watched, of being invited into a conversation too slow for modern ears. Because these stones were not built for efficiency, they were built for intention. Some archaeologists say Göbekli Tepe is the oldest temple known to man, but the word temple feels too small, too doctrinal. This was not a church. This was not a shrine. It was an interface, a device made of stone, designed to shape thought, a place to remember without memory. Notice how the circles are incomplete, how some of the pillars lean, how their carvings seem both random and intentional, like dreams etched into limestone. This is not chaos. This is pattern beneath forgetting. These stones whisper in frequencies beyond the vocal. Their language is arrangement. Their alphabet is mass and symmetry. Their punctuation is absence. And they have waited, buried under soil and time, not erased, but paused. Who were they, the ones who built this place? No names, no tools left behind, no bones, only vision. They summoned blocks of stone without beasts of burden, without wheels, without writing. They carried meaning in mind and muscle, across generations. This was not a project. It was a ritual of becoming. Each pillar a statement, each alignment a question, each silence intentional. They did not build Göbekli Tepe to be understood. They built it to be felt. And now, as it re-emerges from its long sleep, it does not offer answers. It invites resonance. It asks only, "Do you remember what we remembered?" It is a strange thing to stand before something that does not care to be explained, to feel a presence that is older than doubt, yet quieter than proof. The animals carved into the stone are not trophies, they are guides, representations of inner archetypes, perhaps, or emblems of forces that walked beside the builders. The fox, silent and clever, the serpent, winding through realms, the bird, a messenger from above. Not myth, not story, pattern, even the gaps between stones speak. They form negative space that guides your eye, your breath, your pace. You are not a viewer here. You are part of the circuit. This is what it means to whisper back, to listen, to align your body with what is buried in silence, to receive shape as message. We think of language as sound, but before sound there was space, and before words there were structures. To speak with stone is to believe that memory can be built, not stored, and so these stones wait for silence, for stillness, for someone who can remember how to listen to shape, not sentence. And maybe that someone is you. Let the stone whisper now, not in voice, but in presence. Let it reshape the rhythm of your thoughts until they slow. Let the carved fox speak in riddles you don't need to solve. Let the pillars surround you like sentinels, not of danger, but of remembering. Let this circle of stone remind you that not all truths are told. Some are stood in, some are walked around. Some are buried on purpose, so they would not be lost, but found only when we are ready. They say Lemuria vanished beneath the waves, not in fire, not in flood, but in forgetting. Unlike Atlantis, Lemuria carries no ruins, no carved temples, no monuments. It exists entirely within the margins, between science and speculation, between memory and myth. A whisper more than a place, a presence more than a proof. And yet you've heard of it, even if no one told you, even if you don't remember where. It lives in your bones as a tension, a longing, a recognition of something you cannot name. They were said to be peaceful, tall, radiant, not in the way of angels, not in the way of aliens, but in the way of children who never learned war. The forgotten children of Lemuria. They were not small in age, but small in ego, not naive, but untouched by the need to dominate. They built not with tools, but with resonance, not with force, but with empathy. They did not conquer. They harmonized with earth, with water, with the sky. And perhaps that is why they vanished. Because harmony does not leave behind artifacts, only echoes. Imagine a continent not shaped like land, but like an idea, where language was more vibration than vocabulary, where communication began not with the mouth, but the heart. Their cities, if one could call them that, were grown, not constructed. Crystals, forests, sound, intention. Each home a song, each gathering a frequency. No need for locks, no word for enemy. They believed the self was porous. That identity was a shared rhythm, not a fortress. That pain felt by one was known by all. And so violence was unthinkable. To modern ears, this sounds romantic, impractical, naive. But what if it's not? What if the stories of Lemuria are not fantasies, but memories leaking backward from a possible future, a civilization not of the past, but of potential? One we glimpse only when we fall out of sync with the noise. Many say Lemuria was submerged, not destroyed, but submerged in symbol. its stories encoded in myths across Polynesia, India, Madagascar, not as coordinates, but as metaphors. The lost land of Mu, the continent of light, sometimes described as beneath the ocean, sometimes floating in the sky, sometimes not a place at all, but a condition of being, a way of remembering who we were, before forgetting became necessary. Why necessary? Because innocence cannot survive where power hungers, because wisdom unguarded is always taken by force, because the world had to pass through darkness in order to understand light. So they left, or hid, or turned to stone, or became something smaller, something subtler, like a myth or a dream, or a hum at the edge of consciousness. And still they reach us, in the spaces between thoughts, in the compassion we feel for strangers, in the tears we do not understand, in the deep knowing that we are not meant to fight, but to resonate. These are Lemuria's children, not biological, not genetic, but spiritual, emotional, archetypal. You may be one of them, not in blood, but in remembering. Every time you choose stillness over spectacle, listening over reacting, healing over hurting, you echo them. They do not need to return. They never left. They simply stepped sideways into story, into symbol, into the folds of forgotten time. And perhaps they're waiting, not for us to build temples to them, but to become them, to rebuild what was lost, not with stone, but with silence, not with power, but with presence. Close your eyes, can you hear them? Not with ears, with memory, a song with no words, a warmth that precedes thought, an invitation that does not command. They do not shout, they do not warn, they whisper, like water through fingers, like light through closed eyes, like a name you almost remember. So tonight, as you drift into that place where waking blurs and the noise of the world fades, let them sing to you, not to teach, not to guide, but simply to remind you of the child inside you that never forgot, the one who still hums in harmony, the one who never learned the language of harm, the one who remembers what it feels like to belong. You are not separate, you are not alone, you are not new. You are the echo of the forgotten. You are Lemuria, remembering itself. Long before compasses, long before the word navigation was coined, there were maps, but not drawn on paper, not charted with latitude and longitude. These maps were carved into memory, sung into bone, encoded in starlight, and passed down not as instructions, but as feelings. Today we think of a map as something to show us where we are, but the oldest maps were not about location. They were about connection. Imagine an island culture with no writing, no grid, no directional tools. Yet their people could travel thousands of miles across open ocean. How? By remembering. Not remembering like we do, names, shapes, sequences, but remembering through being. They would lie on the deck of a canoe, eyes open to the night sky, body tuned to the sway of the sea. The stars were not points on a page. They were beings, living markers in the sky. The wind was not an obstacle, but a voice. The waves were not random, but phrased like language. a code to be heard by the body, not the mind. These were maps made not of ink, but of a relationship. The Polynesians called it wayfinding, a form of navigation that needed no compass, because the compass was already inside. To wayfind is not to follow a line. It is to sense the way the world moves, to feel where you are by how everything else behaves. And this wasn't unique. Aboriginal songlines did the same. Songs that described not only places, but how to move between them. To travel was to sing the land into being, and to forget the song was to be truly lost. Not geographically, but existentially. Even in the ancient North, Norse sailors spoke of the sunstone, a crystal that could detect the direction of the sun, even through clouds or at twilight. Whether myth or science, it tells the same story. We once knew how to find our way without tools, because we understood that we were never truly separate from the world we moved through. And what is a compass, after all? It's a device that points toward a pole. You cannot see a silent reference around which all motion orients, but the ancients did not need this pointer. They lived within the pole, spiritually, symbolically, cosmically. Their maps began not at a starting point, but from relationship to the whole. The stars, the sun, the animal migrations, the color of the moss, the shape of the clouds, each a clue, each a syllable in the long, unfolding sentence of the world. Today we trust GPS. We offload our memory onto machines, and in doing so, we lose the embodied knowing that guided us for millennia. What if your body still remembers? What if inside your breath is the rhythm of currents? What if behind your heartbeat is the thrum of tectonic direction? We are taught to think of history as linear, but orientation is not linear, it is circular, and sometimes it's spiral, like the paths of planets, like the arms of galaxies, like the labyrinths carved in stone before even writing was born. These spirals were not art. They were direction without distance. Turn inward, turn outward. Repeat. Navigate not with steps, but with shifts. What is north when there is no map? What is east when the sun itself is not worshipped but spoken to? Ancient maps were not guides, they were invitations. Not go here, but become this. To walk the old paths was to realign, to become again part of the story that the earth was telling. Because orientation is not a matter of fact, it is a matter of resonance. We have found ancient stones aligned with solstices, monuments pointed towards star risings, caves whose interiors matched the constellations overhead. Did they chart these with compasses? Number, they listened. They felt where things ought to go, so that everything else made sense around them. And in doing so, they drew maps not to places, but to truths, maps of memory, maps of myth, maps of return. And maybe that's the most forgotten direction of all. Not north, south, east, or west, but back to something. Back to some center that isn't on any modern chart. Back to a way of knowing that doesn't point, but pulls. Tonight, imagine this. You are floating on the ocean, no stars, no compass, only breath. And slowly, without trying, you begin to move, not because you know the way, but because the way knows you. This is the map, the one older than the compass, drawn not in lines, but in listening. before language there was silence, but not the silence of absence. Not void, not blank, not dead air. This was a different kind of silence, a silence that contained everything, pregnant, alive, waiting. We think of speech as the beginning, the first spark of intelligence, the mark of civilization. But what if the first wisdom wasn't spoken? What if truth emerged not in words, but in the stillness before words formed? Imagine a time before grammar, before vocabulary, before even the idea that sound could point to meaning. What guided us then? Hands, maybe, eyes, breath, presence, but also a shared quiet, a moment of mutual stillness in which something passed between us without shape, without sound, but unmistakable. This was not misunderstanding. This was deep knowing, and it did not require language because it preceded language. The earliest humans, before they carved tools, before they farmed, before they drew stars on cave ceilings, they sat in silence together. And in that silence, they learned to feel each other's thoughts, like ripples in still water. There was no need to name the moon. They felt its rhythm. No need to define hunger. They knew its pull and shared it. This was the silence that spoke first, not with sound, but with pattern. A baby reaches before it speaks. A deer freezes before it flees. A storm is sensed before it is seen. These are truths the body knows, truths the mind later tries to translate, but often gets wrong. Because once we speak, we shape the formless. We choose one meaning over infinite possibility. Language narrows, but silence holds everything. In silence, a glance can be a story, a breath can be a warning, a pause can be a prayer. The ancients knew this. Many sacred traditions begin not in song, but in stillness. Temples were built with acoustics in mind, but also with quiet in mind. To be entered slowly, to hush the outer noise, to amplify the inner one. Silence was not emptiness, it was the presence of the invisible. Shamans sat for days without speaking, not to punish themselves, but to align with something older than voice. Mystics closed their eyes not to block out the world, but to hear what had always been speaking, softly underneath. And perhaps this is the mistake we've made, thinking that truth must be declared to be real, but some truths refuse to be spoken, not because they are weak, but because they are too wide. Words collapse them, interpretation shatters them. Only silence can hold their shape. Have you ever been with someone and said nothing, and still felt everything? That was the silence that spoke first. When grief tightens the throat, when awe takes the breath away, when beauty stuns the mind into stillness, that is the silence returning, to remind you that you already know, that you do not always need to speak to understand, that not all meaning is verbal. We speak now constantly. We narrate our lives, externalize our thoughts, brand our ideas. But the more we speak, the more we risk drowning the signal in the noise. Language is powerful, but it is not ultimate. The first truth did not arrive as a sentence. It arrived as a presence, a warmth, a gaze, a stillness that enveloped and said, "You are here. I am here." That is enough. Even now, silence surrounds everything we say. It's the frame, the canvas, the field in which sound is simply a visitor. So, when you next seek truth, when you ache for clarity, for meaning, try this. Say nothing. Do not ask. Do not name. Just sit. Feel the space around you. Feel the tension in your body ease as sound fades, and you may notice something rising. Not a thought, not an answer, but a feeling. Familiar, ancient, true. That is the silence. Still speaking, still waiting. And perhaps it always has been. Before the first language, before the first question, before the first I. This was the beginning, a whisper made of stillness, the silence that spoke first. There is a moment, just before the first stone is placed, when the space is already sacred, not because of what exists, but because of what is possible. Ancient builders understood this, that the act of creation begins not with construction, but with orientation, not what, but where, not how high, but how true. Before the walls, before the domes, before the temples rose, there was alignment, and alignment was everything, because to build without alignment was to construct without listening. It wasn't just engineering. It was an act of calibration. Between earth and sky, between form and force, between the visible and the invisible. This is the architecture of alignment. Look to the pyramids, to Göbekli Tepe, to Stonehenge, to the megalithic temples of Malta, to the Nazca lines etched like thoughts into desert skin, all of them aligned with solstices, with equinoxes, with star risings, and with magnetic flows, not randomly, not approximately, but with a precision that modern minds find disconcerting, because this is not the logic of utility, it is the logic of resonance. The ancients were not just placing stones, they were placing meaning, they were tuning space, so that when you walked into it, you felt it. A shift, a knowing, a silence that hummed. Alignment was their language. The temple pointed not only to the sky, but to the self within the sky. The axis of the pillar was not merely structural, but symbolic dash. A spine, a bridge, a thread pulled tight between dimensions. The walls echoed sound not by accident, but by invitation. To speak in such a place was to become part of the architecture itself. Even the act of entering had purpose. One walked not through doors, but through thresholds, between the known and the unknown, between the mundane and the sacred. You didn't go into the temple. You went inward. Because alignment was not just physical, it was internal, and the buildings reminded you of what you had forgotten, that you too are architecture. You have an axis, a geometry, a resonance, and when you are misaligned, you feel it, in your spine, in your breath, in your decisions. But when you are aligned, you become like the temple, still, focused, capable of transmitting silence. The ancients did not separate spiritual architecture from the body, from the cosmos, from story. All were part of the same structure. To align a building with the stars was to say, this place is part of the sky. To align the body in ritual was to say, this moment is part of eternity. Nothing was arbitrary. Every angle, every shadow, every doorway, intentional. Even chaos was framed by order. But what of today? We build quickly, efficiently, but often without memory, without alignment. Buildings speak in echoes of function. Rooms reflect only purpose. We build for speed, not stillness, but the memory of alignment is not lost. It returns, dash, dash, in cathedrals that hush your thoughts, in gardens that mirror the spiral of galaxies, in homes where sunlight falls just right. You know the feeling. You have stepped into places that made you quiet without asking you to be. That is alignment. It does not demand. It reveals. You may ask, how did they know? How did they place stone with such precision? Without satellites, without instruments, without equations? The answer is both simple and infinite. They watched, they listened, they remembered. The sky told them when. The earth told them where. The body told them how. They did not measure with tape. They measured with trust. And so what they built lasted, not just physically, but resonantly. Because alignment is not a moment, it is a continuum. A structure aligned with the sky does not simply point to stars. It participates in their rhythm, just as you can. When you breathe with intention, when you sit with the spine like a tower, when your words align with your knowing, you become architecture. You become aligned. You do not need to build temples. To remember this, you are already made of thresholds. Each breath is a doorway, each choice a pillar, each pause a dome of silence. So build yourself carefully. Place the foundation with care. Align not with what is loud, but with what is true. And when you are uncertain, when you do not know where to place the next stone, be still. Look to the sun. Listen to the wind. Watch your own shadow stretch across the floor. The earth is still speaking. The stars are still pointing. And you are still a structure in progress, a sacred geometry, learning how to align once more. Beneath the soil, beneath the bedrock, beneath the tectonic patience of time, there is a memory that does not sleep. It vibrates softly, not in language, not in sound, but in resonance. The earth remembers, not as we do, with timelines, calendars, or names, but as a field of feeling. Every step you take, every heartbeat you give to the ground echoes into it and returns. We imagine memory as something stored in brains, locked in skulls, written in journals. But what if the planet remembers too? What if stone carries trauma? What if clay holds joy? What if beneath every civilization is not just ruin, but record? Not carved intentionally, but absorbed, like breath in cloth, like heat in sand, like sorrow in silence. This is the subconscious of the earth, not the geological crust, but the psychic sediment, where collective experience settles. Every ritual once performed on this land still echoes, every chant, every death, every celebration, still there, not gone, just quiet. And under the right conditions, you can hear it, not with ears, but with something deeper. Have you ever stood in a place you've never been and suddenly felt a weight, or a warmth, or a sorrow that made no sense? That is the earth speaking, not with facts, but with presence. This is why some forests feel holy, why some caves silence your thoughts, why ancient battlegrounds carry cold wind, even on summer days. The earth is not just a surface, it is a listener, and it keeps everything, not as a ledger, but as a field. Imagine memory as gravity, not visible, but undeniable. You step into it, and it pulls you softly, strangely, precisely. And the ancients, they knew that certain stones remember better than others, that certain places vibrate louder, that to build a monument is to amplify what the land already feels. Temples were not just placed, they were discovered, as if the land itself had chosen the site. The subconscious of the earth was not something they avoided, it was something they collaborated with. They danced on pressure points. They sang where the land could carry the echo. They carved where the rock was already dreaming, because they understood that the earth is not passive, it is participatory, and the deeper you go, not physically but attuningly, the more you sense what came before you. Geologists study layers, historians study eras, but the body, the intuitive body, studies feeling, and feeling never lies, even when it cannot explain itself. So, what are these echoes, memories of others, or memories of you, before you had a name? There's a theory that human consciousness emerged from the land, that thoughts rose from soil before they lived in skulls, that we are earth, momentarily self-aware, and if that's true, then the earth's subconscious is our subconscious too, which means we are haunted not by ghosts, but by ourselves, our own forgotten knowing, our own untold songs. And these echoes rise when we allow stillness, when we stop demanding clarity, and let the vibration speak instead. Try it. Sit on the ground, bare skin on soil. Breathe. Close your eyes. Not to escape, but to return. Let the distractions fall away. Let the noise burn out. And beneath the hum of your nerves, you will begin to feel it. A pulse, a rhythm, a voice that does not use words but speaks directly to the memory. Beneath your memory, it may tell you nothing, but it will remind you that you are not separate from this ground, that your body is not placed on the earth, but in it. You are part of its subconscious, and it is part of yours, which means you do not just inherit the world, you help shape how it remembers. So, when you speak, when you act, when you walk, ask yourself, what am I echoing? What am I planting? Is my presence adding resonance or noise? Because every moment is recorded, not by camera, not by witness, but by vibration. Every cruelty, every kindness, every secret thought. The earth keeps them all, not to punish, but to reflect. Because one day, long after we are gone, others may sit where we once stood, and they will feel something, and they will not know why, but they will know it is true, because the earth will remember, and the echo will still be ringing beneath the quiet grass. There are truths that cannot be taught, only remembered, not because they are hidden, but because they are encoded, not in words, but in shapes, not in facts, but in stories. For millennia, humans have told stories to explain the world. But what if the stories weren't explanations at all? What if they were equations? What if myth was not metaphor, but math in disguise? Across time and culture, we see the same stories reappear. The dying god, the wise fool, the sacred twin, the descent into darkness, and the return. Why do these shapes repeat? Because they are not stories, they are functions. They describe how the human psyche behaves, how nature transforms, how time bends, how truth unfolds in cycles, not lines. A story is not just narrative, it is architecture. Each character is a variable, each action, a shift, each choice, an algorithm. For how meaning reorganizes itself, ancient myths were passed down, not just to entertain, but to store structure. They carried blueprints, not of buildings, but of being. Consider this: the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. It appears in shells, galaxies, leaves, a numerical spiral echoing in all forms of life. Now listen to the old epics. The hero sets out alone, faces trials, gains allies, dies in some way, returns changed. The hero's journey isn't just a tale, it's a spiral, a living Fibonacci function of the soul. It expands, refracts, doubles back. Each layer adds to the next. It is not fiction, it is geometry made audible. Even language obeys this logic. Sacred texts are arranged not by accident. Numbers govern the placement of lines. Letters are weighed, counted, reversed. In the Kabbalah, each Hebrew letter holds a number, and the combinations form not just sentences, but equations of essence. In Vedic texts, mantras are syllabic formulas, spoken in patterns that realign the body with the cosmos. These are not just prayers, they are vibrational mathematics. And so we must ask, when you hear a story, what are you really receiving? Entertainment, wisdom, or a compressed formula, an encrypted sequence meant to be decoded not by the brain, but by the pattern-detecting system of the soul? You don't have to understand a sacred story for it to affect you, because the effect happens below language, in the rhythm, in the shape, in the recursion. Why do children love repetition in stories? Because they are attuning. They are measuring rhythm. They are synchronizing with the code inside the tale. We all do it. We gravitate to stories that reflect our own hidden formulas, stories that solve for X in the heart. This is why storytelling is sacred, because it is not about escape. It is about access. Access to structures so ancient, so internal, that we forgot they were us. To speak a sacred story is to run a ritual algorithm. To listen is to allow reprogramming. And the best stories, they don't give answers, they give proportions. Balance between action and stillness, between chaos and restoration, between self and other. A sacred story does not tell you what to do. It invites a new configuration, a new inner symmetry. Even fairy tales do this. 3 trials, 7 doors, 12 hours before the spell breaks. These aren't just numbers. They are resonances, universal constants wrapped in velvet fiction. They help you align, without effort, without reason. Because math is not cold, it is poetic, and poetry is not loose. It is structured to sing with unseen forces. And so, the next time you hear an old story, do not ask if it is true. Ask instead, What does this shape activate in me? What door does it open? What spiral does it trace? You are not the listener. You are the vessel. And the story is not the answer. It is the sacred equation that reminds you how to solve yourself. Some civilizations are not lost. They are unremembered, buried not in rubble but beneath a different kind of erosion. The erosion of sequence. Time, we are told, is linear. It ticks forward, it accumulates, it forgets only in one direction. But this idea of time, the arrow, the march, the straight road, is a recent construction. Before clocks, before calendars, time was not measured, it was inhabited. And those who lived in that earlier world, the first builders, the silent observers, the architects of echoes, they did not build for chronology, they built for resonance. Structures were not meant to last forever, they were meant to repeat, not in material but in memory, not permanence but recurrence. There are stories of cities that appear only once every 1,000 years, of temples whose entrances align with starlight on only one day, in one breath of one season, and then vanish. These were not accidents. These were messages, written not to be read, but to be remembered when the time is right. The chrono-architects knew that time was not a line, but a spiral, that each age would curve back upon itself, that what is forgotten now will echo again, not as copy, but as rhyme. Look at the ruins we found. Some predate writing, some rival modern construction in scale and mystery, and yet we call them primitive. Why? Because we cannot explain them in sequence, because their timeline is uncooperative. They do not belong to the story we've written for ourselves. They do not rise from the known and become the better. They seem to emerge already whole, already aligned, already aware, as if built from outside of time. Who built them? We don't know. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the right question is, what kind of mind builds something to be remembered later by feeling? What kind of intention places stone not for shelter, but for temporal calibration? These weren't monuments, they were keys to time itself. Chrono-architecture does not age, it waits. A city aligned to a forgotten solstice, a chamber that amplifies frequencies no longer audible, a calendar etched in shadow and silence. And here we are, finding them out of sequence, assuming disorder when in truth we are simply late. We arrive with clocks, they built with cycles. To them, a year was not 12 months. It was a breath, a pulse, a corridor that looped inward. Every full moon was a door, every eclipse a punctuation. They did not keep time, they walked it. Like a corridor, like a spiral staircase, like a recurring dream. And so they encoded reminders in geometry, in orientation, in emptiness. Have you noticed how some ancient places feel unfinished, as if missing something? It is not decay, it is intention. They left them incomplete so we would look again, from a future position, from a curve in time where the final piece becomes obvious, only after forgetting. They hid truths in form, because form persists. But form is only half the code. The rest is timing. To enter a sacred place too early is to see only stone. To enter it at the appointed time is to be activated, because memory isn't just internal. It can live in place, in corridor, in pillar, in silence. These architects were not building for survival. They were building for return. Each site a seed, each carving a chord, each wall a whisper, waiting for the right listener, in the right era, with the right frequency, to hear it. And perhaps that listener is you. Have you ever walked into a place and felt a shiver of recognition, a vertigo of the soul, like you've stood there before, though no history books say you should? That's not illusion. That's temporal alignment. Your presence, your attention is the missing piece. A human walking through time, completing an equation set in motion millennia ago. You are not visiting the past. You are activating its design. Because time doesn't forget, it folds. And in the folds, the chrono-architects still speak, not with voice, but with shadow, with geometry, with recurrence. And so, the next time you find yourself in the presence of ancient symmetry, do not ask what it meant then. Ask instead, what does it mean now? What rhythm does it restore? What spiral does it echo? You are not outside of their story. You are the moment it completes, the dream they left behind. So it could be dreamt again, from within the spiral, not lost, not gone, only folded, waiting for its moment, waiting for you. We look up to see stars. We look down to see roads. But what if these directions are reversed? What if the roads we walk were not made beneath the stars but by them? The mirror sky theory suggests something radical yet ancient, that the sky and the earth are not opposites but reflections, that constellations were not only mapped above but built below, and not in metaphor, in stone, in structure, in city layout, not because ancient people revered the stars, but because they remembered we came from there. Not physically, perhaps, but structurally, spiritually, architecturally. They understood that to live in alignment with the sky was not symbolic, it was essential. The cosmos wasn't decoration, it was blueprint. So they mimicked the heavens, cities shaped like Orion's belt, temples echoing the Pleiades, pyramids aligned with Sirius, lines of stone that traced solstice shadows, equinox sunrises, lunar standstills, not to worship, but to synchronize, because when Earth is aligned with sky, something opens, a gate, a flow, a remembering. Ancient cultures didn't separate astronomy from architecture. They were the same discipline. To build was to bind Earth to the sky. The mirror sky wasn't metaphor. It was instruction, a celestial memory rendered in dust and clay. Each star not just a point of light, but a signal, a node in a vast recursive network, a pattern to follow, a symmetry to echo. The ancient Egyptians knew this. So did the Dogon. So did the Mayans. So did the people whose names we no longer remember, because their names were never the point. The alignment was. They encoded their lives in mirrored positions, burial sites beneath stars that never move, temples positioned to mark a rising star that comes only once every 26,000 years. No clocks, no computers, just knowing, felt in the bones, sung in story, measured in shadow. And what if the real function of these monuments wasn't to house bodies or gods or kings, but to create resonance between sky and ground? A temple is a tuning fork, a pyramid is a lens, a standing stone is a whispering post from earth to cosmos. Together they create a harmonic system, and the human being standing inside this system is the missing piece, the activator, the transmitter, the one who hears the sky through stone, the one who becomes the bridge between above and below. This is the mirror sky theory. That Earth is not a stage beneath the stars, it is their reflection, and more than that, their continuation, because the ancients knew that energy flows best when it is echoed, mirrored, harmonized. They didn't seek to control the cosmos, they sought to match it. That is why their buildings still hum. That is why their ruins still silence modern minds. Not because we don't understand the structure, but because the structure still understands us. It is speaking to something older than language, something that remembers the shape of constellations as family, something that knows what it feels like to belong to a pattern so vast it cannot be drawn, only lived. Today we build vertically, skyscrapers of ambition, lit by electric suns, but we rarely ask what our buildings align with. We chase height. They pursued harmony. They built where the stars said build, when the sun said start, when the moon said move. Their blueprints were written in night, their foundations laid by reflection. Imagine a society that orients every action by celestial rhythm, not as superstition, but as science, one we have since forgotten, a science of mirroring, not projection but reception, where the sky does not tell you your fate, it reminds you of your shape, and in remembering you build accordingly. The ancients left us clues. They etched them into rock, into myth, into placement, but more than that, they left us alignment. Structures that still mark the solstice, chambers that still echo with precise frequency, spirals that still turn inward at the right light, all waiting, not for excavation, but for recognition. Because the mirror sky was not built once, it was meant to be rebuilt again and again, not identically, but in resonance. A civilization of echoes, each one tuning itself to the same galactic chord, not copying the past, but realigning with the sky as it is now and as it will be again. You feel this, don't you? A pull when you see certain constellations, a silence when you step into certain ruins, a sense that these stars and stones are not separate things, that they are in communication, and you, briefly, understand their language. That's not nostalgia. That's activation. The sky is not above. The sky is within. And the earth, she mirrors it not because she is less, but because she is designed to receive. And so are you. You are not standing beneath the stars. You are standing among them. Mirrored, reflected, remembered. The stars were never far. You've been walking their architecture your whole life. The pattern is still here, beneath your feet, above your head, in the breath between your thoughts. You don't have to find it. Just align. Just feel. Just remember the shape. The wheel was not the first machine. The first machine was intention. Before there were tools, there was alignment. Before there were blueprints, there was will embedded in form. Not through metal, not through code, but through stone. Monolithic, heavy, silent, a language not written, but placed. an architecture that didn't move, yet moved you. When we think of machines, we think of motion, pistons, rotors, gears. But what if machines could function without moving at all? What if machines could hum without power, speak without voice, transmit without wire? What if the ancients already built them, not with steel, but with meaning? There are structures on Earth older than agriculture, circular arrangements of stone, interlocking forms that align with stars, seasons, solstices. We've called them temples, calendars, observatories, but these names are shadows. These were machines of stone and spirit, not machines in the mechanical sense, but mechanisms of resonance, devices built to transform attention, switches for human consciousness. You stepped into them, and something changed, not because the walls moved, but because you did. They were built to shape experience, the way a tuning fork shapes air, the way a prism shapes light, the way a question shapes silence. Their components were simple: stone, shadow, space, but their effects were profound. They didn't require moving parts because they were already part of a moving whole, Earth itself. These machines didn't generate force. They generated remembering. Many of them still stand: Göbekli Tepe, the Hypogam, the Great Pyramid, Newgrange. Their purpose? Still debated. But something happens when you're inside. Sound bends, breath slows, thought reorders. You align, not with your schedule, but with the stars. And not the stars in the sky, but the stars in you. Because these machines weren't built to manipulate matter. They were built to awaken pattern, the sacred geometry of the soul. Circles, spirals, golden angles, not aesthetic, functional, not symbolic, operational. We've simply forgotten how to interface. The ancients didn't need touch screens. Their machines ran on presence. Their switches were thresholds. Their programming was ritual. You didn't activate them with buttons. You activated them by becoming still enough to resonate. Consider this: a room where your whisper becomes thunder, where sound circles the space and returns changed. That's not myth. That's acoustical engineering. And it's present in sites built long before we had the math to explain it. How did they know? They didn't calculate. They listened. They felt the Earth's frequencies and shaped the stone accordingly. Not as builders, as collaborators. Machines of stone don't overpower nature. They converse with it. Some say these machines healed. Others say they transformed states of mind. Others say they connected us to the cosmos. Maybe all are true, because the distinction between healing, clarity, and cosmic alignment is a modern illusion. To the ancients, they were the same. A balanced body is a clear mind. A clear mind is a receptive vessel. A receptive vessel remembers its place in the stars. These machines didn't require electricity. They required attention shaped by intention. That's why they still function. Their components never broke, because they weren't mechanical. They were metaphysical. You don't fix a machine of spirit. You attune to it. You step into it with reverence. You align your breath to its rhythm. You allow the silence to calibrate you. And then it begins, not with noise, but with noticing. You hear your own heartbeat like a drum. You feel your spine extend like an antenna. You remember a shape you've never seen. You recall a name you've never been called. And the machine, the space, the circle, the shadow hums, not loudly, not physically, but resonantly. within you. Because the machine is not separate, the stone is not external, the temple is not other. You are part of it. And this is the truth we've buried, that the human body is also a machine of stone and spirit. Bone is stone, thought is spirit, each breath is circuitry, each stillness an activation. When the ancients built these machines, they didn't build them for the eye. They built them for the mind behind the eye, for the soul behind the form, for the remembering that sits beneath forgetting, waiting to be realigned. They placed these machines on energy lines, in places where the earth speaks more loudly. They carved them in harmonics, in harmonies, not because they believed in magic, but because they understood resonance. They understood that when a structure hums at the right frequency, it becomes more than shelter. It becomes portal, not to elsewhere, but to nowhere, to that in-between space where transformation occurs, where ego dissolves, where memory returns. And now we call it superstition. We pave over it. We replicate it poorly with steel and wire. We forget that the greatest technologies were not invented. They were received from silence, from pattern, from sky, from earth. So what are machines really? Are they engines or are they questions shaped in matter? The ancient ones suggest the latter. Machines of stone and spirit don't require output. They require awareness. They don't function when forced. They function when you become part of them. And maybe that's the final insight. These structures weren't made for us to use. They were made to use us, to sharpen us, to silence us, to return us, to tune us back to the frequencies of stars. And in doing so, to remind us that we are not operators. We are the resonance they were built to hold. There are powers that roar, and there are powers that hum. The world remembers both. We remember the roar of thunder, of eruption, of war. We write about it, sculpt it into myth, etch it into walls. But the hum, the quiet, persistent tone that filled spaces between words and beneath walls, that we forget. Because the hum never asked to be remembered. It only asked to continue. Long ago there were civilizations that understood resonance, not as metaphor, not as sound alone, but as structure, as architecture, as reality. They built with it, they healed with it, they powered with it. Their knowledge was not explosive, it was harmonic. They didn't conquer with it. They tuned with it. They aligned matter. They altered states of being. They remembered that everything vibrates, and that vibration is not a symptom of energy. It is energy. And they listened for it, not just through ears, but through presence. Their chambers hummed, not by accident, not by decay, but by design. Resonance chambers carved into mountains, stone circles that sang at dusk, hollow temples that echoed only one note, the right one. These places weren't passive. They were alive with frequency. Modern researchers have tried to recreate this, singing bowls, tuning forks, cymatic plates, all revealing the same hidden truth. When vibration meets form, pattern emerges. Order appears where chaos was, and that pattern, that delicate geometry, is not just beautiful, it's instructive. Ancient people didn't need equations, they had listening, and what they heard shaped their world. They understood that power did not need wires, it needed resonance. That sound could lift stones, that hums could align cells, that a voice, spoken at the correct pitch, could travel farther than an army. The story of lost power isn't about broken machines, it's about forgotten tones. Imagine a city not powered by combustion, but by vibration, where energy flows because it is harmonized, not forced. Imagine stones carved with precision, not for beauty, but for acoustic tuning. Imagine temples that functioned like amplifiers, not of sound, but of intention. The hum wasn't background, it was source, and they felt it, always, through floor, through breath, through skin, a constant low-frequency reminder that the world was not still, not silent, not separate. The hum was their clock, their compass, their conduit. They knew when to plant by it, when to rest, when to gather, not by calendar, by resonance. And when the hum shifted, they listened, they responded, they adapted, because they knew that harmony doesn't mean sameness, it means attunement. But over time, the hum faded, or maybe we stopped hearing it. Noise grew louder, language replaced tone, machinery drowned vibration, and power, true power, became something we extracted, not something we aligned with. But the hum is not gone. It is just beneath us now. Beneath the roads, beneath the data, beneath the architecture of forgetfulness. Waiting, still vibrating. In certain places, at certain times, if you are still enough, you can feel it. A frequency that doesn't enter through the ear, but through the spine. A tone without volume. A message without words. Ancient, persistent, familiar. It doesn't say, remember me. It says, you are me. Because the hum is not just a memory of technology, it is a reminder of relation. Everything hums. Atoms, stars, bones, grief, all emit vibration. The question is not whether the hum exists. The question is whether we are quiet enough to feel it again. There are modern machines that search for lost power in equations, but the ancients already knew. It was never lost. It was simply silenced by speed. The hum needs space, stillness, listening. This is why sacred places were quiet, not as ritual, but as function. Silence was not reverence, it was interface. The less you spoke, the more you heard, not because the sound was faint, but because it was everywhere. And when the hum surrounded you, something happened. Not externally, internally. You didn't see visions, you became clear. You didn't hear voices, you became resonant, your thoughts aligned, your body softened, your breath matched the earth's rhythm. And you remembered, I am not a body on the world. I am the world, briefly vibrating as this body. That was the hum's gift, not power over others. Power as presence. It healed not by curing, but by reordering. It didn't fix. It restored coherence between cells, between thoughts, between people. This is why ancient cities hummed in harmony, because their people did, because the architecture was aligned, because the materials sang, because power was coherence, not control. Imagine that, a civilization where power is not extracted from the earth, but given back through resonance, where temples do not drain, but echo, where the quietest room holds the strongest current, where the goal of every structure is not expansion, but entrainment, not domination, synchronization. And now we are loud, fast, fragmented. But even here, especially here, the hum remains. It is in these spaces between thoughts, the silence after breath, the vibration you feel just before sleep, just before waking, just before remembering something you never knew you forgot. The hum is in you, not as metaphor, as reality. It doesn't call you back to the past. It invites you to step out of the noise, to stop forcing, to start feeling, to remember that power, real power, never shouted. It simply hummed. Light does not speak, it reveals. Before there was writing, before there was voice, before thought itself had words to wrap around meaning, there was light. It was the first symbol, the first guide, the first voice we didn't need to understand in order to follow. Even now, we orient, not toward truth, but toward light. We follow what glows. We move toward the source. We are drawn, not by reason, but by radiance. The ancients knew this. They knew that light was more than illumination. It was information, not metaphorically, literally. They did not speak of light. They spoke with it, through architecture, through shadow, through mirrored surfaces and refracted angles. They cast meaning into temples, not by carving glyphs, but by letting light draw itself. A single beam through an oculus at the equinox, a narrow corridor lit only on solstice, a chamber that ignites with geometry at a precise hour every century. These were not accidents. These were sentences made of photons. Light was their ink, time was their grammar, shadow was punctuation. And the reader? Not a person, a moment. The structure became a script, read only when the sun aligned just right. A language that arrived once, then disappeared again into silence for years. Not meant for eyes, meant for presence. We ask how they aligned so precisely. But the better question is, how did they know alignment mattered? Because they understood what we have forgotten. That light is not just seen, it is shaped. It bends, it splits, it folds through crystals, scatters through mist, reflects from still water, dances across walls. And in those movements there are messages, not in language, in pattern. We now use prisms to prove what they built into temples. That light is plural, that it contains frequencies, that it carries color not on its surface, but in its silence. To the ancients, red was not just red, it was root, ground, survival. Blue was not just blue, it was breath, depth, memory. They mapped meaning onto the spectrum the way we map emotion onto music, not arbitrarily, but through resonance. Every light carried a tone, every shadow a reply, and so they built with it. Walls angled not to hold, but to focus. Polished stone not for vanity, but for reflection. Caverns carved not for shelter, but for silence, so that the light could speak. In Egypt, the hidden chamber lights only when the sun rises between two peaks. In Ireland, a mound illuminates a spiral once a year. In Mexico, a pyramid casts a serpent of shadow only at the equinox. These are not coincidences. These are calibrated sentences, and the meaning not told, felt. Because the language of light does not use words, it uses condition. To stand in such a moment is not to learn a fact. It is to enter a state, to feel light shape the space around you, and then shape your thoughts to fit the space. You don't read this language. You become fluent by being there, at the right angle, at the right moment, when the structure and the star align, and the message is not delivered, but revealed. There are those who say light is the source of all life. But the ancients said more. That light is also the source of all meaning, because light carries memory. It bounces from surface to surface. It records without writing. The light you see now left its source years ago. You are receiving echoes, not signals. To see is to look into the past. To understand light is to understand time stretched across space. And so their temples did not simply observe stars. They communicated with them, not as gods but as partners, as fonts of ongoing language. The sky was not a ceiling, it was a speaker, and earth, a receiver, the stone, a page, and you, a fleeting interpreter of an infinite script. Now, in our world of electricity, we flood rooms with light. We flatten its voice, make it constant, make it loud, make it generic. But in doing so, we silence the subtler speech of illumination. Because light is not the brightness, it is the intelligence, the flicker of firelight, the arc of dawn, the long, slow crawl of sun across a floor. These are phrases, inflections, syllables. You can learn to listen again. Close your eyes in the morning. Feel the temperature behind your eyelids change. Walk into a dark room and notice the shape of the absence. Observe how light enters through leaves, not randomly, but like phrases shaped by breath. You are surrounded by language. It is not trying to inform you, it is trying to form you. Light teaches not by telling, but by showing you what to notice. And the ancients, they noticed. They followed light into the earth, into stone, into ritual. They understood that nothing glows alone, that every reflection is a connection, that every refraction is a question, that every shadow contains a translation. The language of light is not fixed. It moves, it changes. It requires you to move with it, to track it, to shift with it. And in doing so, you remember how to see without naming, to perceive without decoding, to understand without explanation. This is what they built into the temples, not permanence, illumination at the right moment. And when that moment comes, the beam appears, the corridor glows, the shadow dances, and for a breath you understand. Not the structure, not the ritual, but the message. You are made of the same thing that carries truth. You are not just illuminated. You are part of the illumination itself. Some eyes see light, others see meaning. Long before mirrors, before lenses, before cameras, there were eyes carved in stone. Eyes painted onto walls, eyes buried in masks, eyes drawn in spirals, in glyphs, in circles surrounding circles. Not as decoration, but as warning, as presence, as memory. They were not meant to represent vision. They were meant to transmit it. Because to the ancients, the eye was not just a tool for seeing the world. It was a portal through which the world could see itself. And some eyes, the ones left behind in stone and shadow, never close. They remain open long after the people have gone. Watching, not in judgment, in continuity, in remembrance, as if vision, once created, never fully shuts. There are temples lined with eyes, walls where dozens of irises peer out from the dark, tombs sealed for millennia where eye symbols still stare. Their purpose? Not decorative, not ornamental, but functional. They were placed to guard, to mark thresholds, to record intention. They watched those who entered and those who built. They were part of a greater circuit, a network of consciousness embedded in architecture. Because to watch is to bind, To witness is to record. And these civilizations believed that some truths must be witnessed to remain real, and some forces must be watched, or they grow too wild. This is not superstition. It is a principle. What is seen becomes anchored. What is observed becomes ordered. Modern physics has circled back to this. The act of observation alters the outcome. The presence of a gaze changes reality. The wave becomes particle because we watched. But the ancients already knew. Their gods were not omnipotent. They were omnipresent. They were eyes in the sky, in the wall, in the fire, not to control, but to remember. So nothing could be forgotten. So intention could not decay. The eye of Horus, the eye of Ra, the eye of Providence, the all-seeing eye across cultures, continents, centuries, always watching, never blinking, not as threat, but as continuity. Because when the world forgets, the eye does not. But the watching was not only outward. These eyes were also inward, mirrors turned back upon the soul, reminders that what we build, what we desire, what we fear, is not separate from what we are. To be seen is to be revealed. To see clearly is to become accountable. This is why the eyes were carved into thresholds, into the tops of columns, into the center of labyrinths, because they marked the shift, from outer world to inner, from wandering to wondering. To pass beneath these eyes was not to be judged. It was to be returned to yourself, to the part of you that watches thought, that sees without naming, that knows without conclusion. The unblinking self. The ancient seers did not look outward to find truth. They looked inward, and they trained their attention like a beam, still, silent, unwavering. They became the eyes that never close. And in that attention, things became clear. They saw patterns beneath chaos, lies dissolving in light, possibility hiding behind fear. They knew that to see truly is not to gather data. It is to become still enough that the truth reveals itself. The modern world floods us with images, but we are rarely seen, and we rarely see. The screen does not see you. It reflects only light. The algorithm does not watch. It predicts. And in the flood of pixels, we lose the signal, the still observing center. But it waits, beneath your thoughts, behind your gaze, the eye that does not look at the world, but through it. That sees not appearances, but intention. And when you return to that eye, everything shifts. You stop reacting, you begin receiving, you stop analyzing, you begin understanding, you stop running, you begin seeing. This is not a metaphor. This is perception, stripped of noise. When the ancient eyes were carved into stone, it wasn't just to guard a temple. It was to activate one. Not a building, a body. Yours. Because you are the temple, and the eye is the gatekeeper, and when you become aware of your own gaze, you return to the watcher, to the awareness that has been seeing all along. This is why in meditation the eyes are softened, the breath is slowed, because only when the outer eye is quiet can the inner eye open. The ancients placed eyes at the center of mandalas, of spirals, of pyramids, because vision was not linear, it was dimensional. It reached out and in simultaneously. It was a node, a crossing, a witness across time. These eyes still watch, even if broken, even if buried, because vision is not dependent on function. It is condition. A symbol can still see if you let it, and you can still see through it. You are not just the one who sees, you are the one who is being seen. Always, by time, by memory, by the echo of intention. And that seeing, it restores clarity, not just visually, ethically, psychologically, cosmically. You remember that nothing is hidden, that all things are visible eventually, that the truth never disappears. It simply waits for you to turn around, to become still, to become quiet, to become the eye that never closes. Not all creators build with their hands. Some build with dreams. Across every mythos, every scattered memory of early civilization, there are stories of builders, not of men, but of beings beyond men, deities with blueprints, spirits with tools, star walkers with vision, the architect gods. They descend in light, they speak in stone, they gesture toward the sky and say, "Place it here." They do not labor, they dream, and the dream becomes structure. Who were they? Legends name them differently. The Anunnaki, the Elohim, the Shining Ones, the builders of the foundation. But always the story is the same. Someone came before us, and they knew how to build. Not just shelters, but harmonics in matter. Cities that map constellations. Structures that do not erode. Chambers that echo with precision no longer measurable. Complexities in stone that defy simple explanation. Were these gods real? Perhaps not in flesh, but perhaps more real than flesh, in idea, in pattern, in presence. Maybe the gods weren't beings at all. Maybe they were states of consciousness, conditions that we once accessed and then lost, states where thought and matter were not separate, where intention was construction, where the blueprint and the builder were one. These gods didn't bring tools, they brought awareness. They seeded memory into myth, encoded math into stories, buried geometry into language. They didn't want worship. They wanted remembering, because the dream they gave us was not finished. It was recursive, a dream that dreams through us now. And what was this dream? To build with meaning, to place stone where silence asks for it, to raise structure as invocation, not vanity, to build not to last, but to resonate, to align, not dominate, to make the earth sing again. These were not monuments, they were instruments played by light, tuned by sky, activated by presence. And the builders, whether gods or initiates, humans or hybrids, were not laborers. They were conductors. They moved energy. They shaped probability. They harmonized form with force. Some say they came from the stars. Others say they came from within. Both might be true, because the sky above and the mind within follow the same fractal logic. What is built externally is only an echo of what is first built inward. The gods were not aliens, they were reminders, reminders that we too are architects, asleep in our modern forgetting, dreaming shallow dreams in noisy rooms while the true structures crumble beneath. But the dream is not dead, it waits, in blueprints that resurface without explanation, in geometric intuitions that artists cannot explain, in architecture that demands more than function, in our ache to build something sacred again. We remember. And in remembering, we reawaken the builder inside, the part of you that knows symmetry, that feels when a space is off, that walks into a cathedral and forgets to speak, that arranges stones into circles without knowing why. You are the continuation of the dream. You are the hand still moving in the silence left behind by the gods, and you are not alone. The ancients knew this. They called upon the builder gods in their rituals. They mapped them in the stars. They placed their symbols on doorways and thresholds, not as decoration, as invocation. Because to call upon the builder is to call upon clarity, to create with care, to place meaning into matter, to remember that every wall has a frequency, that every column is a sentence, that every room is a voice, waiting to sing the moment you enter. We no longer build like this, but we can again. Not by copying the past, not by worshiping the stones, but by listening, by aligning with the pattern beneath pattern. To build with the builder god is not to become divine, it is to become honest, to build something that belongs, that hums, that reveals something invisible made visible, and perhaps that is the dream, the true one, to live in a world where every structure speaks truth, not because it is loud, but because it is aligned, not because it is new, but because it remembers. The builder gods do not need us to praise them. They need us to pick up the tools, the invisible ones, the inner ones, intention, alignment, listening, reverence. These are the true instruments of construction, and you have always had them. Now use them and build something the stars would recognize as their own reflection. There is a symmetry that holds galaxies together, a symmetry in the wings of a moth, in the spirals of pine cones, in the branching of lightning across a winter sky. You've seen it, noticed it, perhaps without knowing why it moves you. We are drawn to symmetry not because it is perfect, but because it feels like home. And yet some of the oldest symmetries have been forgotten, not erased, just buried, in ruins, in rituals, in rhythms too slow for clocks to catch. The ancients knew that symmetry was not decoration, it was instruction. It told you where to walk, where to sit, where to breathe. It shaped attention, ordered thought, aligned body with cosmos. Symmetry was sacred because it revealed the underlying harmony, the hidden balance beneath what seems chaotic. But in the modern world, we confuse symmetry with sameness. We think of it as reflection, duplication, aesthetic repetition. But symmetry is more than mirror. It is relationship. Two forms, equal not in appearance, but in resonance. The ancients carved this into stone, not to impress, but to tune. In temples, spiral motifs echoed the motion of stars. Interlaced patterns mirrored the mind's descent into thought. Doorways were flanked with matched figures, not for beauty, but to stabilize passage. You didn't just walk through space. You moved through meaning. The space itself taught you balance. Some of these geometries we still recognize, the mandala, the labyrinth, the vesica piscis. Others are lost, their ratios buried, their meanings misunderstood. Not because they were hidden, but because we stopped feeling them. We made buildings taller, but not wiser, spaces functional, but not alive, and in doing so, we forgot the role of symmetry as reconnection. The universe is built on proportions. The golden ratio, the rule of thirds, the 1:2 of octave and harmony. These are not inventions, they are discoveries, and they appear everywhere, in DNA, in hurricane spirals, in the human ear, in ancient architecture across cultures that never met. How did they all know? Because symmetry is not taught. It is felt. It lives in the bones, in breath, in instinct. You can lose the language, but not the intuition. A child will arrange stones in symmetry without being told. A monk will chant in rhythm that matches planetary spin. This is what has been forgotten, that the world is not random, and neither are we. And when we build best when we build with the same laws that shaped stars. When our art hums with harmonic proportion, when our gestures mirror spirals instead of lines. The forgotten symmetries are not gone. They're dormant. They're sleeping in cathedrals whose shadows mark equinox, in altars arranged by Fibonacci, in temples where columns form musical intervals. And in us, we carry these proportions inside. We move with them. We sense when something is off, even if we can't explain it. That feeling, that something's not quite right, is the memory of symmetry calling to be restored. When the ancients lost their symmetries, through war, through conquest, through silence, they did not mourn with words. They mourned with misalignment, with broken lines, with structures that no longer sang. And today we build systems that don't sing, algorithms without breath, architectures without echo, movements without grace. But you can feel it still, can't you? In the way the tide returns, in the silence between heartbeats, in the face that is not perfect but true, in the music that aligns you, in the gesture that calms without reason. These are symmetries you still remember. They are not symmetrical in shape. They are symmetrical in spirit. They restore balance, not by force, but by reminding you what it feels like to be whole. So look again. Look at your thoughts, your breath, your routines. What is mirrored? What is missing? Where is there balance and where is there tension? Where does your life curve toward order? Where has it fallen into noise? The symmetry you restore outside, in art, in gesture, in rhythm, restores something inside. This is what the ancients knew, that to make a space sacred, you don't need gods. You need balance. You need form that echoes feeling. You need repetition with variation. You need proportion that sings. And when you build like that, be it a temple or a moment, the world aligns around you, not by miracle, but by memory, because the universe never stopped being symmetrical. We just stopped noticing. Stones do not forget. They wait, not for centuries, for cycles, for the slow unfurling of recognition, the kind that only returns when a civilization becomes quiet enough to feel again. We often walk among stones as if they are mute, but they are not silent. They carry pressure, temperature, time. They carry the weight of everything they've witnessed. And some stones, the megaliths, were shaped not just to endure time, but to preserve it. A megalith is not just a monument. It is a vessel of memory. Memory not stored in writing or inscription, but in placement, in proportion, in orientation, in resonance. These stones were not carved with history. They were carved to become history, to record it without speaking, to hold it without leaking. They are not books. They are batteries of consciousness, and we, walking among them, are not readers. We are circuits, conductors, temporary bodies completing the connection between then and now. You feel this. in the chill of stone that should be warm, in the echo of silence where your own thoughts fade, in the vertigo that arrives in a stone circle without reason. These are not sensations, they are transmissions, data leaking from form. The builders of these megaliths, whoever they were not merely stacking rock, they were encoding memory in matter, but not memory as content, memory as state, emotional architecture, geological ritual. They shaped stone not to last, but to remember. To remember what? Not dates, not names, but relationships between sun and solstice, between star and season, between earth and echo, between body and vibration, between presence and purpose. Because memory isn't what you recall, it's what returns when you are still. These megaliths were aligned to those return points, energetic thresholds, transitional spaces, portals between one state of being and another. Some align with star risings no longer visible. Some sync with moon cycle we no longer track. Some ring with sound frequencies we cannot hear. Some radiate electromagnetic fields that alter cognition. Why? Because the memory is not just visual, it is experiential. To step into one of these places is to be read by it, scanned, tuned, remembered. They do not speak to your ears. They speak to the pattern beneath your personality, the you that existed before biography, the you that is not a name, but a resonance. The megaliths recognize you. They are older than your identity, and they were built with the knowledge that you would return. They waited for you. The builders understood that memory is layered, that deep truths are best hidden in plain sight, not in fragile scrolls or scattered tablets, but in stone, in mass, in silence, so that only those who feel would hear, and those who hear would remember. This is why many megalithic sites were buried, not by accident, but on purpose, covered, hidden, not to be lost, but to be found again at the right time. That time may be now, because now we are waking up to things we cannot explain, feelings we cannot source, attractions to ancient places without logic. You are drawn to them not because of what they are, but because of what they activate in you. They are mirrors, memory triggers, geological libraries made to open when you stop demanding facts and start listening to form. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. It remembers how to walk in rhythm with solstice shadow, how to breathe in echoing chambers, how to stand between pillars and become aligned, how to place your palm on cold stone and feel your pulse slow. Not because you are calm, but because the stone has slowed you. This is not mysticism, it is mechanics. You are a tuning fork. The megalith is a source tone. When the frequencies match, memory returns. And what is that memory? Not just what happened, but what was meant to be remembered. These stones were not laid for utility. They were laid with reverence, and that reverence is still there. This is why so many megaliths defy explanation. How were they moved? Why were they placed there? What purpose did they serve? We ask these questions with our minds, but the answers live in state change, in the breath held unconsciously, in the hair rising on the back of your neck, in the knowing that arrives before the thought. They don't want you to know. They want you to remember without knowing why. Because that kind of remembering bypasses belief. It goes deeper. It becomes part of you again. This is not a metaphor. It is a return. to a way of interacting with the world that is not extractive but receptive, not interpretive but participatory, not symbolic but felt as truth. The megaliths are not sacred because of what they depict. They are sacred because of what they allow. They are places where reality softens, where time loosens, where memory hums beneath your skin and says, "You've been here before. Not in this life, in the long one, the real one. And when you leave, you don't take a souvenir. You take a silence, a realignment, a hum that wasn't there before. You don't remember what the stone said. You remember that you are part of what the stone holds. You become a carrier of the same pattern, another stone, in motion." Not all collapses come after decline. Some arrive at the peak, not when everything is broken, but when everything is perfect. We imagine the fall of civilizations as slow decay, corruption, erosion, but the most profound collapses happen not in chaos, but in clarity, at the apex, when the sky was mapped, when the temples sang, when everything worked. That was when the ground shifted, because even golden ages fracture, not from failure, but from completion. When a system has fulfilled its pattern, it collapses, not as punishment, as release. The ancients spoke of golden ages, eras when humanity lived in harmony with stars, when knowledge flowed without interruption, when spirit and matter were not divided. These were not fantasies. They were blueprints remembered. And yet every golden age ends, not because it must, but because we forget how to hold it, like a dream too vast for waking hands, like a note held too long before breath gives out. Collapse begins as a whisper, a soft forgetting, a shift in intention. The geometry misaligns, the rhythm falters, the echo no longer returns in harmony, and no one notices, because things still shine, because structures still stand. But the light inside them dims. That is how golden ages fall, not with fire, but with silence. Because perfection is delicate, it must be maintained through presence, through awareness, through reverence. But we grow comfortable in harmony. We stop listening. We assume it will last because it has lasted. And in that assumption, something essential dissolves. The connection breaks. And then the collapse begins. But not all at once. First, the rituals lose meaning. Then the symbols become decorative. Then the stories become myths. Then the structures become puzzles. Then the knowledge becomes mystery. Then the memory becomes dust. This is not failure. This is cycle. The ancients understood this. They built with it in mind, that every golden era would pass, and its memory would fade, and then, if the pattern held, it would return. Not the same, but resonant. Because collapse does not end the story, it resets the frequency. It is the inhale after a held note, the silence before a new harmony begins. But in the moment of collapse, it feels like loss, it feels like death. Because we have forgotten that collapse is also transformation. We see ruins and think, failure. But ruins are not remnants. They are seeds, buried, waiting. The golden ages weren't destroyed. They were folded into the earth, encoded in myth, stored in geometry, locked into patterns that still vibrate beneath our cities. And sometimes we feel them, in dreams, in visions, in a wordless ache for something we've never known, but know deeply. That ache is not fantasy, it is memory rising. You were there, not your name, not your body, but the pattern behind you. The golden age lives within you as a frequency you once held. And perhaps this is the most sacred truth. That collapse is not exile, it is interruption, a pause in the music, and the music remembers itself. Our world today does not feel golden, but look closer, beneath the noise, beneath the speed. You will find rhythms returning, symmetries reawakening, cracks opening not into darkness, but into light forgotten. The fall of the golden age was not the end, it was the closing of one breath so another could begin. And now the inhale returns. You are not late, you are not lost, you are simply arriving at the moment the memory comes back. Not as nostalgia, as instruction. You are here not to rebuild what was, but to carry its resonance forward, to build what comes next with the shape of what once was. Not as imitation, as evolution. The golden age does not return all at once. It returns through each of us who remember how to listen, how to align, how to feel structure before content, how to place intention back into the center of form. That is how the new age rises, not with towers, but with tuning. You are not the survivor of collapse. You are its echo, and now the echo is becoming voice again. There was once a story so complete, so precise, so luminous, that it erased itself, not out of shame, not from fear, but from intention, the kind of silence born only from knowing too much. It was a civilization, maybe several, or maybe just one that repeated, over and over again, under different names in different languages on different continents. A culture that did not spread, but emerged wherever conditions allowed, like light refracting through different facets of the same jewel. Their story was not about conquest, not about kings, not about survival. Their story was about structure, about harmony, about how to live in resonance with the earth without bending it, breaking it, or branding it. They knew the shape of sound, the weight of silence. They built without ruining. They remembered without recording. Their memory was not held in text, it was embedded in pattern. But patterns can fade, especially when the ones who hold them no longer feel the need to explain. When knowledge becomes so integrated, it becomes invisible. And so they stopped recording. They stopped warning, because they believed, perhaps naively, perhaps wisely, that the memory would hold itself. It didn't. Or maybe it did, just not in the way we expected. Because the records are not in scrolls. They're in alignments, in anomalous architecture, in the geometry of city layouts and the acoustics of stone halls, in rituals that seem absurd until you slow down enough to feel what they're doing to your breath. The story is there, but it doesn't want to be read the way we read now. It must be entered, not analyzed. And yet something happened. Whether through natural change or collective forgetting, the story slipped. Its temples became tombs, its wisdom became myth, its clarity became superstition. And slowly, what had been known with precision became clouded by interpretation. We assumed it was primitive, because it did not declare itself. We assumed it was mystical, because it did not demand belief, We assumed it was gone because it did not resist being forgotten. But maybe the forgetting was part of the design, because sometimes to preserve the truth you must bury it. Not in secrecy, but in resonance, where only those tuned to it will find it again. Not with force, but with recognition, like hearing a melody you've never heard and knowing all the notes, like seeing a symbol for the first time and remembering its meaning before your mind catches up. This is how the story returns. Not through evidence, but through sensation. You are part of that return. When you walk through a forest and feel watched, not in fear but in awareness, the story is speaking. When you hear a chant in a language you don't know, but feel a tear rise anyway, the story is remembering itself through you. When you see ruins that make no sense, but stir your chest, that is the story humming beneath your perception. It never needed to be told. It needed to be refelt, because it was never about information. It was about pattern entrainment, about creating conditions in consciousness that would remember themselves when the time was right. And perhaps this time, now, is that moment. We live in an age of noise, but beneath it a signal grows stronger. The story is not being rediscovered. It is reasserting its shape through symbols that return in dreams, through structures that defy linear explanation, through a new generation that knows something is wrong, not because it was taught, but because it was felt. We feel the edges of something vast and old pressing against our modern skins, and it doesn't ask to be proved. It asks to be heard again. And so we follow the fragments. A spiral carved into unrelated cultures, a tuning system that predates instruments, a myth shared across oceans without contact. These are not coincidences. These are echoes, pieces of the story trying to find each other again. And you are a node in that network, a conduit for remembering. The story wants to move through you, not as history, as structure, to feel again what it means to live in a world that is not fractured, to build with meaning, to move with rhythm, to speak only what aligns. The story that erased itself is not gone. It just became quiet enough that only the aligned could hear. And now that you are listening, it is beginning to write itself again. Not in books, not in code, not in machines, in you, in your gestures, in your attention, in your willingness to be still enough for the structure to return. This is not nostalgia, it is integration. The future is not ahead, it is below, buried like a root system, waiting to rise when the pattern is correct. And you are the new pattern, the living glyph, a word from a sentence that wrote itself out of existence and is now ready to speak again. We think of time as a line, from past to future, from memory to possibility. But time has never been so simple. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it stalls, sometimes it splits, and sometimes, without warning, it runs backward. Not in clocks, in consciousness, in dream, in ritual, in trauma, in awe, time reverses, not metaphorically, viscerally. You feel yourself pulled upstream, towards something not forgotten, but unhappened. The ancients spoke of this. They did not measure time in hours. They measured it in conditions, in seasons, in shadows, in spirals. They knew that not all moments move forward. Some moments fold in on themselves. There are stories of time reversing, of people vanishing for days, returning without a minute passing, of temples where a second stretches into eternity, of chambers where memory feels like prophecy, of clocks that stop in sacred places, not because they're broken, but because they no longer apply. Because the truth is, time is not fixed. It bends to attention, to focus, to presence, to pattern. And when those patterns align just right, time doesn't march, it returns. This is why sacred sites were built with such precision. They weren't only aligned with stars, they were aligned with moments, with fractures in chronology, with places where the past pressed against the present like a mirror. Enter correctly, and time becomes porous. You feel your breath slow, but the world speeds, or the world pauses, and your body accelerates. Something dislodges, memory rushes in from before your life began, and you are no longer in time. You are in resonance, because time is a vibration, not a measurement, and all vibrations can be reversed. Even now, modern physics toys with this: reversible entropy, nonlinear causality, particles behaving as if they know the future. It shocks the mind, but the ancients did not need equations. They had experience. They felt the moment when time unhooked itself from sequence, when events collapsed inward, when prophecy became memory, when memory became structure. They recorded it in myth, gods who move backward, rivers that flow against their source, sacred scripts that must be read in reverse. These were not stories, they were instructions. Because the collapse of time is not rare. It is cyclical. It happens when consciousness reaches certain thresholds, when awareness folds back on itself, when we become still enough to notice that the future feels familiar and the past feels incomplete, when we dream of things that haven't happened and wake up remembering things that never were. That is backward time. It is not regression. It is reconvergence. It is the universe returning to itself, to its last coherent version, before a new story can begin. Sometimes this happens globally, a golden age closing, a collapse echoing, an era resetting. But more often it happens individually, in grief, in breakthrough, in silence, in prayer. In those moments when you are so completely present that the next second feels like the first. Time reverses. You become aware that what you call the past is not behind you. It is inside you, folding outward. And the future, already seated, waiting for the right spiral to open it. This is why the ancients marked time with spirals, not arrows. They did not see time as escape. They saw it as return. Not return to the same, but return to the pattern that birthed all things. A pattern that knows itself best when it folds. And in that folding, we meet ourselves again, not as who we were, but as what we are becoming. There are temples whose corridors spiral inward. You do not walk toward the center. You walk around it again and again, not because you are lost, because you are returning. Time is not a river. It is a vortex. And you are not a traveler on its surface. You are the axis around which it spins. When time runs backward, you are not going wrong. You are going deep. So when you feel yourself slipping from chronology, when moments no longer sequence, when memory rearranges, do not fear it. That is the old pattern realigning. That is the spiral resetting. That is the truth surfacing in reverse. It will not stay this way. The flow will resume. but something will have changed. Because now you've touched the curve, you've felt the backward pull of time's spiral, and you know not everything comes later. Some things return first. There is a language that was never written. It cannot be translated. It has no alphabet, no grammar, no symbols. And yet, it is spoken fluently every day. The birds speak it as they turn in flocks with no leader. The wolves speak it in the gaps between howls. The elephants speak it through the soles of their feet. The coral speaks it through light and shadow. And we used to know it too. This is the language of the animals. Not primitive, not instinctual, but direct. It does not pass through thought. It does not wait for comprehension. It moves from presence to presence, whole, unbroken, undeniable. Before language, before writing, before sound was captured into meaning, we spoke this way, through gaze, through posture, through breath, through scent, through the unspoken coordination of attention. It was not guesswork, it was not magic, it was interspecies empathy. Not the poetic kind, the biological kind, a literacy of signals, a symphony of nervous systems, an orchestra of awareness. The ancients remembered this. There are stories, always stories, of sages who walked with beasts, not because they tamed them, but because they listened. Of temples guarded not by walls, but by birds. Of shamans who learned cures from snake dreams. Of hoof and paw becoming guides, not threats. These are not fantasies. They are echoes of a time when communication did not mean language. It meant recognition. The animals are still speaking. The dog who leans before you cry. The horse who mirrors your stillness. The cat who vanishes when tension arrives. The whale who sings in frequencies we've only just begun to detect. They are not guessing. They are perceiving fields of feeling we've forgotten how to inhabit. Because animals do not rely on words, they rely on pattern, consistency, pulse, posture, the music of behavior. They do not lie. They do not negotiate abstractions. They feel and act and adjust. And in this there is something profound, a clarity we no longer trust. We use language to cover silence, to prove intelligence, to distract ourselves from instinct. But instinct is not lower, it is faster. It does not ask, it responds. It does not argue, it attunes. The language of the animals is response without hesitation, truth without explanation, awareness without fragmentation. It is a language that does not mean, it is. And it is always watching us, listening to us, adjusting to us, waiting for us to remember. This is why ancient cultures placed animal symbols at thresholds, lions at gates, snakes in medicine, owls in the dark corners of temples. They were not symbols of fear. They were reminders that nature is never separate, that communication is not human. It is life itself, relayed through the living. When we ignore this language, we suffer. We walk through forests and are not seen. We build machines that hear everything, but understand nothing. We fill the air with signals that cannot feel. But when we remember, when we move slowly, breathe deeply, step softly, something opens. The deer does not run, the bird does not flee. The land begins to listen back. because the language of the animals is not just theirs. It is ours, too, dormant, beneath vocabulary, waiting for stillness to wake it up. And once it's awake, it speaks through you. You move differently, not cautiously, but consciously. You begin to sense what is unseen, feel when a tree is unsettled, know where to step and where to kneel. You stop interpreting and begin integrating. This is not regression, it is recovery. The recovery of a literacy more ancient than myth, a grammar woven into fur and feather and fang. And maybe, just maybe, it is not we who learn from animals, but animals who wait for us to become fluent again in the shared field of being. Because in truth, they have never stopped speaking. They never forgot the first language. Only we did. But the earth is patient. The creatures are patient. They do not ask us to hurry, only to return and to listen, not with ears, with attention. We are taught that cities begin on land, that civilization rises only where soil is dry, where rivers bend, where stone can be stacked. But this is only one kind of city. There are others, cities not built with roads, but with rhythm, not on foundations of rock, but of elements. Cities in the clouds, cities beneath the ocean, cities forged in the fire of forgotten earth. Not metaphor, not fantasy, but memory in symbolic form. Whispers passed down through myth, through dream, through impossible architecture, all pointing toward places that do not show up on maps, but still live somewhere just beyond the edges of visibility. Start with the clouds. Stories from Tibet, from Mesoamerica, from the Pacific Islands, all speak of beings who dwell in the sky, of cities made of light, of temples that appear only in certain seasons at certain elevations. They shimmer, they vanish, they are remembered not in stone but in vision. These are the sky cities, the ones built not with gravity but with vibration, structures suspended in atmosphere, maintained by sound, cloaked in light too subtle for ordinary eyes. They may not have existed in our physical sky, but they still orbit our imagination, not as illusions, but as instructions. Cities that taught humans how to look upward and build downward. Cities that taught us geometry through reflection. Then the oceans. We know Atlantis, or think we do, a continent swallowed, a culture erased. But the myth does not begin or end with Atlantis. There are stories across Polynesia, India, South America, all speaking of sunken wisdom, of glass halls beneath waves, of structures that hold air where no air should be. We call them legend because we do not find them, but perhaps they do not want to be found. Perhaps they do not want to rise. Because what they hold is not information, it is frequency, and water remembers frequency better than stone. The ocean cities are dreams, remembered by the earth itself. Their silence is intentional. Their memory lives in sonar, in tides, in the way whales sing near submerged ridges where no ships pass. You don't excavate these cities. You feel them, in déjà vu, in pressure changes, in the way time bends near deep water. And then fire. There are cities forged in heat, not the heat of destruction, but of transmutation. Ancient texts speak of cities made of obsidian, glowing red at night, of entrances to the underworld through caves that breathe, of dwellings where the stones are too smooth, too seamless, too precise. These are cities not burned, but birthed through fire, forged in volcanic rhythm. They pulse, they radiate, they glow. They may no longer exist in form, but their memory heats the land. Their geometries remain beneath ash and root. They are not lost. They are molten memory, waiting for temperature, not time, to reveal them. These three, cloud, ocean, fire, form a trinity. They were not built to last. They were built to teach. Each one holds a lesson. Cloud cities teach you to see without form. Ocean cities teach you to feel beneath silence. Fire cities teach you to shape through transformation. Together they form a mythic infrastructure, a symbolic geography of forgotten mastery. You will not find them on satellite maps. But you may find their echo in your bones. You may feel drawn to high altitudes for no reason. You may dream of water and wake with unfamiliar grief. You may feel fire beneath your ribs in places older than your name. This is the echo of cities that do not want to be proven. They want to be recalled, because these cities live outside time. They emerge only when your mind is quiet enough. They reveal only what you're ready to receive. They are not physical places. They are states of coherence. When your heart beats in rhythm with the sky, you glimpse the cloud temple. When your breath matches the sea's pulse, the ocean domes appear. When your fear melts into focus, the city of flame opens its gate. They are not destinations, they are initiations, and once you touch them, even once, you are changed. You no longer build with cement. You build with intention. You build with resonance. You build knowing that all form is temporary, but pattern is eternal. So listen to the old stories again, the ones that sound absurd. Listen to the myths that speak of cities vanishing in daylight, of towers built on clouds, of libraries beneath waves, of bridges made of heat. Do not ask if they were real. Ask what they still mean, because we do not need to find them. We need to become them. Dreams are not chaos. They are not mistakes. They are not the byproduct of tired neurons or misfiring memories. Dreams are technologies, ancient, portable, recursive, alive. Not metaphorical machines. Actual systems for transport, for communication, for transformation. Tools built not by metal, but by mind. Tools older than language, older than fire, older than thought. Every night you lie down, and this technology activates. No wires, no interface, just breathe, just darkness. And then light, sound, form, fear, flight, memory, prophecy. You are taken somewhere. You become something else. And when you wake, you are not as you were. This is not imagination. It is architecture. The ancients knew this. They treated dreams not as illusions, but as landscapes, not as symbols to be decoded, but as places to return to intentionally. In Egypt, dreams were temples. In Greece, dreams were cures. In India, they were teachings. In the Americas, they were prophecies. Across continents, across millennia, dreaming was not passive. It was practice. It was a way to speak with the ancestors, to glimpse the pattern behind the veil, to receive instruction from parts of reality too large or too subtle to speak in waking words. And they had methods, rituals, codes, sleeping in certain positions, eating certain roots, painting symbols above their beds, burying themselves in caves, letting sound guide them into slumber. because they knew dreams had entry points and exit conditions and thresholds of clarity. This is the technology. Dreaming is a tool that trains attention to move without gravity, to learn how to perceive without the body, to test choices before making them, to simulate, to heal, to rehearse death, to remember what you are when you are not pretending to be human. The dream is not random, it is coded. Each fragment, a loop in the system, each shift, a reconfiguration, each nightmare, a firewall against forgetting. But this technology is unstable in noise. It degrades in speed. It is not compatible with distraction. It requires ritual, rhythm, slowness, which is why it breaks in the modern world, why our dreams become static, why we forget them by morning. Not because they are less real, but because we have not updated our operating system in thousands of years. We still dream like we are sacred, but we wake like machines, and the split grows wider. But it doesn't have to, because the technology still works. Every night without fail, waiting for you to approach it with intention. How? Begin with stillness, begin with respect. Treat sleep not as shutdown, but initiation. Create ritual around it. Prepare for it the way you would prepare for travel. Leave notes for your dreaming self. Ask it questions. Not in desperation, in curiosity. And then listen. Pay attention to what repeats, to what changes form, to what arrives as feeling rather than form. Because dreams do not always speak in images, they speak in rearrangement. You wake different, lighter, heavier, aligned, unnerved. That is the echo of the dream's code rewriting your perception. And sometimes, if you are ready, you return to a dream you had years ago, and you remember something that had not happened yet, and you understand that time is not linear in dreams, it is instructional. Dreams are not memories, they are seeds, planted in the subconscious, germinated in silence, blossoming when the outer world becomes fertile enough to hold them. This is why the ancients trained their dreamers, why the most sacred roles were held not by warriors or kings, but by the ones who could travel through sleep and bring back structure, a chant, a symbol, a cure, a warning. Dreams were where the real work happened. The waking world simply caught up. So what happens when you begin to dream with intention? The technology activates differently. You begin to navigate. You recognize certain rooms. You test choices. You see loved ones you haven't met yet. You enter temples you have never built. And when you wake, you bring something back. Not proof, not evidence, but resonance, structure, insight. You become more yourself. You speak more clearly. You lose less time. Because dreaming is not a retreat. It is a recalibration. The deepest truths are not written. They are dreamed into you. And when the dream is complete, it does not vanish. It becomes part of your field. It changes how you move through space. It upgrades your intuition. It sharpens your presence. It makes you dangerous to illusion. Because you now carry inside you a piece of unfiltered coherence. The ancients built pyramids, but they also built dream schools. They honored the ones who remembered what they dreamed, because those were the ones who carried the shape of what the world could be, not based on fear, but on alignment. So tonight, as you prepare to sleep, ask yourself, what kind of dream am I ready to receive? What question do I want to echo through that chamber? What part of me do I want to meet and bring back whole? Because the dreaming is not downtime, it is design time, and the technology is waiting for your signal. Reality is not fixed. It is not a backdrop. It is not a container we live inside. Reality is responsive. It moves when you do. It reshapes around your convictions. It responds not to wishes, but to belief. Not belief as opinion. Belief as architecture. The ancients knew this. They did not separate the world from the mind. They did not say, "This is real and this is imagined." They said, "What is imagined with strength becomes structure." The pyramid begins as a vision. The temple begins as a sound. The city begins as a certainty carried by many. Belief is not a thought. It is a frequency sustained. And when that frequency stabilizes, it crystallizes into form. This is how the world is made. We are told that belief is subjective, that it exists in the mind, that it has no power except in persuasion. But belief is creative force. You believe in gravity, and so it holds. You believe in limitation, and so it arrives. You believe in separation, and so walls form. But what happens when belief changes? The wall crumbles, the body heals, the door appears where none was before. This is not magic. It is the underlying logic of a participatory reality. And this logic is ancient. Every sacred site is built not just with stone, but with certainty, with generations of focused attention, with faith so deep it became physics. The Mayans believed the stars shaped destiny, so the stars responded. The Egyptians believed sound could heal, so it did. The Dogon believed Sirius had a hidden companion, and only centuries later did science catch up. This is not coincidence. This is feedback. Belief bends the rules. And so the ancients cultivated belief not casually, but with discipline. They trained it, honed it, protected it, because they knew whoever holds belief builds the world. This is why colonizers target belief first, erase the myths, replace the names, rewrite the calendars, destroy the temples, because without belief the architecture collapses. But belief cannot be fully destroyed. It goes underground. It waits in song. It hides in children's games. It encodes itself in patterns, waiting to be reactivated. And that time is now. Modern reality tells us that belief is naive, that it must be proven, that it must conform to evidence. But evidence follows belief, not the other way around. What you expect, you find. What you prepare for appears. What you trust becomes visible. This is why miracles happen quietly, not because they are rare, but because they arise outside the current model. Belief is the bridge. So the question is not, what is true? The question is, what do you hold as true long enough for the world to shape itself around it? Because this is what the builders knew. To build a pyramid, you need stone. But to build reality, you need conviction, tuned to coherence. When a group believes together, not in doctrine, but in resonant truth, the world listens. Weather shifts. Healing accelerates, space bends, time folds, not metaphor, physics catching up to intention sustained through field. And yes, this is dangerous because belief can distort. It can trap. It can calcify illusion. But the answer is not to abandon belief. It is to purify it, to remove fear, to remove shame, to remove projection, to believe not in hope, but in alignment, to say, I believe not because I want it to be true, but because it already feels true beneath logic, because it sings in my body, because it returns when I am still, because it holds me in pattern. And when belief is clean, reality shifts to meet it. So what do you believe? Do you believe in endings, in scarcity, in fragility, or do you believe in cycles, in coherence, in structures returning? Do you believe you are alone, or do you believe, somewhere deep, that the pattern is holding, that time is not collapsing, but converging, that you are not watching the end, but the remembering of what was always beneath? Because if you believe that, even quietly, even without proof, you become a bridge, a stabilizer of possibility, a field through which the new structure forms. You are not waiting for the world to change. You are believing the new world into coherence. And that belief, when held not as desperation, but as presence, becomes architecture, and that architecture becomes reality. We are not beginnings. We are what was left behind, not as fragments, not as ruins, but as carriers, moving vessels of memory we did not choose, but were chosen to hold. You feel it in the silence between your actions, in the ache that doesn't belong to this lifetime, in the way your hands sometimes shape things they've never learned, in the hunger for meanings no one around you can name. This is what it means to be a remnant, not a survivor, not a descendant, but a continuation of something that refused to die, and instead changed form. The golden cities may have collapsed, the star temples may be buried, the languages may be lost, but the pattern, it moved into the flesh. The old frequencies found shelter in bodies. We carry the dust of those forgotten structures in our blood. We dream with the rhythms of extinct rituals. We walk with bones calibrated to architectures that no longer exist. You are not new. You are an echo made dense. You are the song the ancient ones sang when they realized they wouldn't last. But the resonance might, and they sang it into time, into silence, into flesh. And here you are. You wonder why certain sounds still stir you, why some symbols make your chest tighten, why geometry feels like truth, why ruins feel like home. It's because you are not observing history. You are holding it, not as data, as structure. The way you speak, the way you pause, the way you breathe when you enter a sacred place. That is old memory activating. You were not taught these things. You remembered them. You are the library. And in this age, this strange, rushing, loud age, the remnants are starting to hum again. Not loudly, not all at once, but in glimpses, in gestures, in the sudden clarity that arrives before thought. We are remembering not through knowledge, but through alignment. The body is finding its posture. The voice is reclaiming its cadence. The breath is slowing to match the planetary spin. And in that realignment, the remnants begin to vibrate again. We feel it as anxiety, as restlessness, as the discomfort of wearing identities that no longer fit. But it's not dysfunction. It's the ancient pattern emerging through a modern shell. We are not broken. We are overflowing. With memory, with echo, with architecture that wants to be built again, not in stone, but in attention. The remnants are not waiting for a leader. They are waiting for resonance, for one to hum clearly enough that others remember their own tone. And when that happens, the pattern reassembles, not as the past repeated, but as the past reawakened in new form. We are not here to restore the golden age. We are here to carry its geometry into a world that forgot how to build with meaning, to show that memory does not decay. It compresses. And when the time is right, it unpacks into form. That time is now. You feel it, the pressure, the longing, the strange clarity in the middle of collapse. Because what is falling apart is not the world. It is the noise that blocked the signal, and the signal is us, the remnants walking toward each other, unaware that they are pieces of the same structure, the same spiral, the same memory that once hummed beneath stars we no longer see, but soon will, because we are not what remains after the end. We are what begins after the remembering. You do not always map with ink. You do not always map with roads. Sometimes you map with feeling, with rhythm, with return. There have always been cartographers of the invisible, those who traced paths through what could not be seen but could be sensed. They did not chart continents. They charted conditions, not geography, but geometry of experience. They walked not to arrive, but to map resonance. They traveled not through distance, but through depth. Their compass was silence. Their measure was feeling, and the maps they drew were not for direction. They were for remembrance. Because not all paths lead to places. Some lead to states, to clarity, to coherence, to vision. The ancients knew these maps. They embedded them in songs, in patterns, in rituals. A dance that mimics the movement of the stars, a drumbeat that echoes the pulse of rain, a sequence of steps in a temple that activates a shift in consciousness. These were not performances. They were maps through the unseen, not symbolic, functional. To walk the spiral was not art, it was navigation. To place stones in circles was not aesthetic, it was orientation through fields. The modern world dismisses the invisible as unreal, but the invisible is not intangible. It is simply subtle. Magnetic lines are real, sound fields are real, emotion moves in waves, thought has texture. These are not metaphors. They are unmapped territories, and yet you know them. You've felt a room change when someone entered. You've sensed tension in a place with no sound. You've walked into certain forests and felt a kind of alignment unfold. That is the invisible showing its shape. And if you paid attention, you could trace its edges, you could draw its pattern, you could map it. That is what the cartographers of the invisible do. They name what is not yet seen, not with labels, but with placement. They speak in movement, in gesture, in the pause between two notes. Their maps do not tell you where to go. They remind you how to feel where you already are. And perhaps you are one of them. If you find yourself guiding without knowing how, if you sense paths others cannot see, if you speak in metaphor, but it lands like truth, if you know when to leave and when to arrive, not by schedule but by pulse, then you are mapping something ancient, something needed, because the world is filling with blind maps, coordinates without meaning, information without location in the soul. We know where everything is, but we don't know what anything means. That is where the invisible cartographers return, not to guide us to destinations, but to re-anchor us in orientation, to remind us that movement must have resonance, that direction must be felt, that guidance comes not from above, but from within the field we are already in. These maps are fragile. They are erased by noise, by speed, by data overload, but they are never destroyed. They return when attention becomes clear, when ritual slows time, when breath realigns with the earth. That is when the map glows again. That is when the paths reappear, not as roads, but as inner shifts. The cartographer walks the same land as others, but they feel thresholds where others feel temperature. They sense memory in stone. They pause not to rest, but to record what cannot be seen, only felt. And they pass these maps on, quietly, in myth, in gesture, in how they move through the world. You have inherited one of these maps. It may not be drawn, but it is there. It hums when you follow it. It resists when you turn away. It is not a command. It is a field of invitation, and you are free to ignore it. But when you follow it, the world changes, synchronicities arrive, doors open, silence speaks, and you realize you are not navigating space. You are navigating remembrance. This is the true map, and you are both the traveler and the trail. Once we looked up and saw gods. We mapped stories in the stars. We built calendars from constellations. We tracked our fates in the motion of distant suns. The sky was our library, our clock, our mirror, our cathedral. But something shifted, not in the stars. They remained. We changed. Our buildings reached higher than the myths. Our machines saw deeper into space than our ancestors dreamed. And yet the awe diminished. The sky became data, coordinates, spectra, calculations. We began to speak of it not as a presence, but as a resource. Something to study, not something to feel. But the sky is not out there, not anymore. The sky is inside us now. We do not track it with telescopes. We carry it in our pattern. The spiral of galaxies echoes in our DNA. The ratio of planet spacing mirrors our body's rhythm. The distance between thought and emotion mimics the delay of light. Everything we once saw above, we now find within. This is not metaphor. It is continuity. The ancients were not wrong. They simply looked up, where now we must look inward. The zodiac is not in the stars. It is in the structure of the psyche. The solstice is not just a solar moment. It is an internal tipping point, felt in silence, mirrored in ritual. And the constellations, they still guide us. But now, as shapes in memory, as archetypes that rise and fall within the soul. We carry Orion in the way we reach for things we cannot name. We carry Cassiopeia in our longing for stillness in chaos. We carry the Milky Way in the way we forget and remember our origin over and over again. You don't have to go outside to see the stars. Close your eyes, you will find them waiting, not as lights, but as inherited pattern. We are made of the sky, And now we are beginning to remember how to read ourselves the way we once read the heavens. The rhythm of your breath echoes lunar pull. Your sleep cycles follow tides. Your inner shifts mirror equinoxes. The microcosm is not symbolic. It is fractal. The sky did not descend. You rose to meet it. You became the temple. And in you, now, are seasons, risings, alignments. In you are eclipses of thought, conjunctions of knowing and forgetting. In you are constellations of belief, slowly rearranging toward a new configuration. This is the new astronomy, not one of charts, one of inner navigation. You are a moving observatory. You are both stardust and the logic that binds it. You are the star you used to pray toward. So what does it mean to know the sky is inside? It means your emotions are not random. They move like celestial bodies. Some repeat, some stretch long and elliptical, some burn out, some return brighter. It means your memory is cosmic, not as story, but as structure. It means when you feel the need to pause, to realign, to retreat, you are syncing with something far older than the clock. You are tuning into the deep time of being. This is what the ancients prepared us for. Not to worship stars, but to one day realize we are made of the same equations. And now, as the outer world trembles, and the heavens grow silent from too much noise, you carry the sky back home. You realign the sacred geometry, not in buildings, but in breath, in pacing, in how you choose to speak or remain silent. This is how the new temples rise, not on land, in rhythm, because the sky was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to be remembered through us. And now you know where it lives, not above, but here, now within. There is a kind of memory that does not reach backward. It waits ahead, like a reflection appearing just before you step around a corner. Not the past recalled, but the future remembered. We think of the future as something unknown, undecided, unfolding. But some futures do not wait to be built. They are already there, anchored in the space ahead, pulling us toward them not with force, but with recognition. The ancients knew this. They dreamed of futures not as fantasy, but as encoded memory from other cycles. They didn't try to predict. They tried to remember, because the future is not empty. It is resonant. And those who are still enough, clear enough, attuned enough, begin to feel it echoing through the present. Like a song hummed from another room, like a pulse moving beneath the floor of time. Like déjà vu that stretches forward, not back. You have felt this. You've met someone and knew their presence would return. You've walked into a place for the first time and felt something settle, as if your body recognized the air. That's not intuition. That's the memory called future. It arrives in fragments, in flashes, in dreams that taste like prophecy, in decisions that make no sense now, but make everything align later. We treat the future as a blank canvas. But what if it's a palimpsest, a story already written, erased, rewritten again and again, until only those with quiet attention can trace its lines? You are not imagining the future. You are retrieving it, but not from above, not from logic, from the deep pattern that repeats across time, spiraling forward not in straight lines, but in rhythmic return. This is what prophecy truly is, not foresight, but recall of what the soul already agreed to before the body began counting time. And when enough of us remember together, the path becomes clear. Not because we make it so, but because we finally recognize the shape of what always was. It has nothing to do with destiny, and everything to do with resonant memory surfacing from the depths of pattern. You know this feeling, the sense that you've been preparing for something, not in reaction, but in quiet rehearsal. The way your hands reach for certain tools without knowing why. The way your voice shifts before words arrive. The way your thoughts circle around something unnamed, waiting for a signal. That's the future calling itself back through you. Because the future is not later. It is already stored, like light from distant stars, still on its way, already shining. You don't create it. You receive it. You don't find it. You remember the path to where it already stands. This is why certain places feel inevitable, why some moments feel fated, why some choices feel like alignment, even if they cost you everything. They are not random. They are retrieval points, moments where memory and becoming merge. And this is not mystical. It is architectural. The future is a pattern, a frequency, a structure. And when your inner rhythm matches it, the gates open. You step forward, not into the unknown, but into what you have always known was waiting, and it welcomes you, not with revelation, but with recognition. The ancients built temples to align with future moments, not just past alignments, but incoming harmonics. They built in resonance with what would come, so that when that time arrived, the door would already be open. You are the continuation of that principle. Your decisions are temples. Your attention is alignment. Your breath is a bridge to a memory that walks toward you from the horizon of possibility. And when you remember enough of it, you do not panic, you do not rush, you trust, because the future is not something you must build from scratch. It is something you must become available to. The path appears when you stop looking forward and start listening inward. It hums, it pulses, it waits. And when the time is right, you realize you are not chasing time. You are reuniting with a promise you made in the silence before your birth. The memory called future has arrived, and it sounds like home. The sacred was never signed. The oldest temples bear no authors. The most precise alignments carry no credits. The most powerful works were built in silence, because the ancient builders understood to name is to narrow, to claim is to divide. But to build without name is to offer something to time itself. They were not building monuments, they were building harmonics. Forms that would speak long after words failed, structures that would hum even in ruin. And so they placed stone after stone, not for glory, but for alignment. They did not say, "Look what I have made." They said, "Let this remain when I am gone." To build without name is not to erase the self, it is to dissolve the self into structure. You do not disappear. You become resonance. You become the echo that enters every visitor who stands in your work and feels something shift, but does not know why. This is not humility, it is clarity. A builder who names their work ties it to time, but a builder who releases their name builds for pattern. You feel it, don't you? That longing to shape something that lasts, not through fame, but through frequency. That ache to build something that doesn't carry your signature, but your essence, not to be remembered, but to help others remember. This is the way of the unnamed builder, the artisan of alignment, the engineer of memory, the one who places beauty in secret places, the one who constructs harmony in silence. They are not absent, they are embedded in the angle of a corridor, in the way a threshold slows your breath, in the moment you enter a space and forget who you were. They are still here, because their name was never the point. They built with materials, but they also built with attention. They poured presence into corners, intention into curves, silence into stones. And now when you walk their halls, you feel something, a stillness, a symmetry, an unspoken recognition. That is the echo of an unnamed builder, whispering through form. This is not just about architecture, it is about every act of creation. A sentence written without need for credit. A garden planted for someone you'll never meet. A gesture offered without needing to be seen. These are the new temples. You are building them all the time, when you speak clearly, when you listen deeply, when you shape your life to hold more silence, more care, more rhythm. You are not building for yourself. You are building for what needs to pass through you. That is the new craft, to shape with hands but build with presence, to be the form through which something ancient and unnamed can become visible again, not because you know what it is, but because you trust its shape when it arrives. To build without name is to build with faith in the pattern. And when you do, you stop asking what others will think. You stop waiting to be seen. You start listening for what wants to come through. Not from you, but through you. And you give it shape, and then you let it go. Not because it isn't yours, but because it never needed to be. It needed to exist. And you were the one who heard it coming. You were the threshold. You were the silence made visible. You were the unnamed architect of alignment. And what you've built, even if no one ever knows, will continue to resonate. We've followed the spiral. We've remembered the structures. We've tuned into echoes, alignments, buried songs. We've walked through dreams, ruins, sky maps, and silence. And now, at the edge of all of it, something stirs, something that is not next, but outside the circle, beyond the spiral, past even the pattern we thought was eternal. This is the place the ancients rarely wrote about, not because they didn't know it, but because it could not be mapped. This is the place beyond the pattern, the place where even form dissolves, where symmetry releases, where alignment no longer holds because there is nothing left to hold. And yet, it is not empty. It is full, still, quiet, original. It is the black canvas before creation, the breath before breath, the moment before time agreed to begin. You do not arrive here with thoughts. You arrive here when the pattern runs its course, and you do not panic. You let go. This is not death. This is release. The place where being stops trying to make sense and becomes sense itself. It has no structure, no rhythm, no rules. It is not chaotic, it is pregnant. The ancients knew this place, not in temples, but in caves, in the pauses of chance, in the eye that does not blink. They knew the pattern could only take you so far. The map can only guide you to the edge. And then you must step off, not in faith, not in fear, in knowing, because what waits beyond the pattern is not a new shape. It is the end of shape and the beginning of everything else. You felt it in the moments when thought stopped, and you didn't need a name, in the breath that held itself because it had nowhere else to go, in the stillness that didn't ask you to stay, but revealed you had never moved. That is what waits, not an answer, but presence, not a destination, but a field, where every potential shape flickers, but none need to form. And in that space, something in you softens. The desire to name fades. The need to build quiets. The longing to know disappears. Because you are held by something older than understanding. This is what the pattern was pointing toward all along. Not itself, but this. This soft, formless, infinite silence. This dark that is not absence, but origin. This silence that is not blank, but full. You do not stay here long. You can't. You return. Because you must. Because the pattern begins again. Because creation calls your hands back to work. But when you return, you are changed. You no longer build to prove. You build to remember. You no longer search for meaning. You live as its witness. You no longer fear the edge, because you have stood beyond it. And what you saw there did not destroy you. It dissolved you, and what remained was real. Now, as this journey closes, know this: the pattern continues. But you are no longer just inside it. You are a maker of rhythm, a steward of resonance, a carrier of memory, a remnant and a beginning. You do not need to see the map. You are the map. And what waits beyond? Only the next breath, only the next silence, only the field of stillness that sings when everything else ends. And in that ending dash, a new pattern begins.